Grand Rising, everybody. How you doing? As promised, today is Friday, and have a conversation that I usually avoid. Oh, I need something to drink. Which we're going to talk about the Native American slavery versus the transatlantic African slave trade. It is part of a conversation that started yesterday. I'm gonna keep talking while I'm walking over here. Part of a conversation that started yesterday, where we were sidetracked a little bit after talking about the Gospel of Thomas. And thought that it would make a good conversation today. You know, this has been an argument, especially when you're dealing with the spiritual community, especially the we were already here crew, and people can only see one side of a story. They can't see the entire story. So hopefully today we can get the entire story straight. Going to give people time to get on a little bit. I'm actually getting better at starting on time. Look at that. I got started a little bit early today instead of damn near 11 o'clock. But I have a meeting that's going to be here around noon 30. So I wanted to make sure I got here in enough time to give you guys some quality time to have a quality discussion. And we are going to let people, if you're on TikTok, be able to come in. Grand Rising, Debbie, how you doing? But we're going to talk about this. And I actually haven't, because it's a debate that I don't necessarily engage in that often. I just stick like kind of on the outside of it. I haven't done any research on this in a while, so I had to go and remember a bunch of stuff. So I was up to about 2 o'clock in the morning, going over some material that I knew where to go search and look for. It's 9 o'clock there. Look at you. But I had to, last night I was going over some material, had to go back and research a little bit more, find some materials that I had in the past, some pages that I used to go to where I have information that could be trusted, some legal documentation, all that. Oh, before we get started, I need everybody to start liking on TikTok. If you're on TikTok and you're going to like this, you want to be here, you want this to continue, I need a whole bunch of likes because people get all, they get all in their feelings on TikTok, and then all of a sudden they want to, oh, he's talking hate speech and he's smoking a cigar. I want to cancel him. So I'm gonna need a lot of likes on TikTok to counteract all that bullshit they be doing. But I also want y'all to like and subscribe on Facebook and YouTube. Hit the like buttons and all that, and continue to share the video. But anyway, if you are finding me for the first time, most of the time we talk about we deconstruct religion and I help people to find their own pathway. I don't preach anything, but mostly it's deconstruction. That's why you look at the name of it, Coach Renz, but it's why I left religion with Coach Renz. So today, this discussion concerning Native American slavery versus transatlantic African slavery. What we're talking about. And I am the owner of Smoking Phoenix Cigar Lounge. So if you're ever in Stone Mountain, Georgia, come holler at me. But so what's the big problem here? Why is this even a question? Why do we even talk about this one? And it's mainly because I never really encountered this whole deal until I guess it was about 8-9 years ago. And I believe the gentleman's name was Calloway. What up, Renee? In Oklahoma. We're going to talk a little bit about Oklahoma, matter of fact. And I think it's Dane Calloway was his name. For me, he popularized this whole movement of we were already here, right? It was this, and it was this movement that comes out of, to me, it comes out of the fact that growing up in the United States, the only thing they teach you about your history is that your history starts in Africa. That's it. If you black, not Africa, your history starts in slavery, sorry. If you ain't white, if you ain't Caucasian, your history started in Africa. In slavery. God dang. And that's all they talked about. And now you got this Ron DeSantis dude out here talking his nonsense. Slavery was good for people, but that's what we have. We had that. We got that. Yeah, you know. And so what that created, and then they made it seem like Africa was such a horrible place. They told you that Africa, everybody in Africa was starving. You know, they didn't tell you about the cities. They didn't tell you about the suburbs. They didn't tell you about the schools, the all that sort of thing. Everybody in Africa is starving little children with flies on their head. That's what they told you. That's what they taught us when I was coming up. I'm 51 years old. So they made Africa and being African and having any ties to Africa the most negative thing that they could possibly do. So along those lines of trying to escape from any kind of ancestry in Africa, I started seeing the we were already here. We weren't slaves. It's impossible for them to have gotten that many slaves to come over to the Americas, which is a that is a mind trick too. The 12.5 million, that's a whole mind trick thing. You when a person says that, you need to actually correct them on what the real information is. We'll get to that part. But hey, let me know you're here. I want to say grand rising to who's ever here. So, you know, like Debbie and Renee. But a lot of that was a mind trick. Now I'm gonna go ahead and tell you what side of the fence that I'm on. I'm on the side of the fence that both of them happened. Both of them happened because uh, those are just the facts. But one did happen more so than the other, and depending upon what region you're in, by the time I'm done with this, you're going to be able to see that there are a lot of people who could claim native to North America who don't even live in North America, yet that is where a lot of their ancestry comes from. And you're also going to see that a lot of the people running around saying that my family native, unless you got some proof. I don't want to hear my grandmother say it, my grandfather say it. That doesn't prove anything. I can sit here right now and say, well, my grandmother said that we come from Creek Indians. I can say it. I can say it all day. But do you have any proof of that? Do you have birth certificates? Do you have marriages? Can you go into like an old church Bible and show where they got married? Do you have land purchases of them too? Like, show me some paperwork that those people, first of all, had some existence. Second of all, that you are related to them. Most people that I know who are running around saying, Grand Rising Donald, running around saying that, you know, well, we native. I asked them, okay, what's your family? Prove it. Show me your family heritage. Well, my grandmama said, nah, bro. That my grandmama said we got Indian in our family. Nah, nah, no. I need more than that. You got to come a little bit stronger. It's easier just to say, I don't know. I don't know. But this is what I would like to believe. I'd rather you say that. What I would like to believe is that we got Indian in our family. Oh, look at the greater hell. You got Indian in your family. That don't mean shit. You just as well have white, so Caucasians in your family to have that hair. If you're from the West Coast, you could just either have Asian in your family to have that kind of hair. Matter of fact, it's a young lady that I know of. She's from the West Coast. I look at her family. I'm like, God dang, they must be have a lot of native in them. But no, they Japanese. Whole bunch of Japanese in their family. She's black, she's Blasian. So no, I'm gonna need some proof. I don't want to hear no. My grandmama said, my daddy said, oh, I'm from South Carolina. I'm gonna get to South Carolina. South Carolina was an interesting situation, but there's no shame in either one because our histories go far beyond when the colonists got here. The Native American history that was here is longer than when the colonists got here. And that's the problem. We don't we start from the defeat and move to today instead of looking far beyond. Every culture has went through ups and downs. So just to get started, I'm gonna start out with pre-colonization, pre-Europeans coming to the Americas. Um, Basically, and you know, there was a guy, Anthony, I told him to come on to TikTok if he wanted to come on live. But if anybody want to come on live, you're gonna have to do it over on TikTok. That's Coach Renz over on TikTok. So pre-European colonization of the Americas, it seems like everybody around the world practiced a similar type of slavery within their own people groups, that people that look like them, as far as what we call race today. The Aztecs, the Mayans, the Incas, the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, the Apache, all of them took slaves from war criminals. The same as the Zulu, the Ashanti, the Dahomey, all of these tribes, these nations in Africa, these nations in the Americas, the nations in Europe, the nations in China, in Asia, all these nations took slaves from war captures for the most part. And oftentimes they sacrifice them, but we're just going to stick with, in this consent, we're going to stick with Europe, indigenous Americans, and Africa. But all of them committed some type of slavery, but it was a slavery of war criminals, and those people were allowed to maintain their religions. They were allowed to maintain their names. It was nothing like the stripping that occurred during the transatlantic and trans-Sahara slave trade. So it was still horrible. I am not condoning it, but it was nowhere near as bad. Slaves actually had rights and things of that nature. Now, when the first Europeans came to the Americas, they originally did enslave the Native American people, the people who were here. But they didn't enslave them. They did the same thing they did in Africa. First, they went and they purchased natives from other tribes. They purchased the war criminals. Now, in Africa, they didn't do this as much nor for as long. It lasted like a split second literally, like it lasted from 1492 until about 1515 is about how long it lasted in Africa that they actually purchased war criminal slaves. After that, they just went in and kidnapped people in Africa. In the Americas, so all that was, and I'll say that because all that stuff about how as if all these African countries were selling slaves to the Europeans, that lasted for about 2 decades, and that was it. After that, it didn't last any further, right? And they did the same thing that the natives in America did. They traded them in order to get guns and supplies and things of that nature to fight their own wars. But in the Americas, it lasted a much longer time frame that they would purchase, and you have to break this up depending upon where you're talking about. So in the English colonies, and it's mainly the English and the Spanish colonies that we're going to talk about. The English and the Spanish colonies purchased slaves from war criminals, mainly, and it was mainly done by the Spanish. The Spanish did it more than anybody else. The English did it, but not as much, and it was mainly up north. Here's an interesting fact of South Carolina. The majority, the slavery that was occurring in you could call it the trans-Caribbean slave trade. Because in the Carolinas, the majority of slaves that were captured that were native were sent to the Caribbean. They were sold down in Hispaniola. In all situations, the first thing that I do is I follow the money. All right. You're investigating something, follow the money. So when I was following the money, what the money showed is that it was more lucrative for the Carolinas, the Floridians, those people to capture slaves, Native American slaves, but not keep them in the Americas. Not keep them in America. This is where some of y'all finna get mad. Some of these people run around like, we indigenous. But they would send them to Hispaniola, especially because if you know, Hispaniola is sugarcane and tobacco crops especially sugarcane, made more money than all 13 colonies put together. And we're talking about in the 1500s, 1500s and 1600s. But sugarcane in Hispaniola, crops grown in Jamaica, those cash crops in the Caribbean and then down in South America made more money. But just Haiti made more money than all of the 13 colonies. So when you add in the Caribbean, the rest of the Caribbean, when you add in Brazil, so you got the Portuguese and you got the Spanish, that was making more money than anybody else. So the South Carolinians, the North Carolinians, the Floridians, the Georgians actually sent over 50,000 slaves in the 10-year period down to the Caribbean. And this was indigenous people, because this was before the first African slave ever came to the Americas, where it came to North America. You see, in Brazil, they also had the mixture, the native, the indigenous North American, the indigenous people weren't sent down there as much because the Portuguese had already started importing Africans, right? And if you look at the current, that current actually comes from Africa down into the Caribbean, but it's easier then to swoop south into the Caribbean and South America than it is to swoop north, especially if you're trying to go way north. But it's just an easier current to follow to get you, and then it's easier to get back to Africa if you're trying to make a round trip. If you go north, you kind of got to go way up towards Europe before you can come back down the African coastline. So you got to think money. Now, what you had was the majority of these indigenous people. Shit, this one I keep touching this every now and then. I got to reset that timer. But the majority of the indigenous people were sent south. They were sent to the Caribbean. So they weren't hanging around in Georgia. My family's been in Georgia for many generations. Before Georgia, some of them Alabama, and some of them, and then Ohio. So most of the indigenous people were sent south into the Caribbean, right? Grand Rising, Margaret, yeah, Margaret. So this is before the first black person, the first African came to North America. Now, the gentleman yesterday, Anthony, Indiana, all right, Indiana. We're talking about that's funny. What Anthony has said, he said that if you look at the Virginia census of 1619. Okay, so first, I was hoping that he would be here by now so that I can square away what he was saying. There was no Virginia census of 1619. 1619, they accounted for when the first slave ship arrived in North America in 1619 in Virginia. It carried about 20 to 30 slaves. And then a few days later, another ship arrived in Virginia. In its totality, in that year, about 400 slaves from Africa arrived in Jamestown, Virginia. So there is no census, there was no U.S. census of them, of how many were here. And in 1619, since that was the first Africans to arrive into the North America, then yeah, you can say there were hardly any black people, there were hardly any Africans in the Americas. But 200 years later, 250, 260 years later, when a census was done in Virginia, it accounted for 500,000, 500,000, which actually technically is 490, but 490,000 African descent slaves were just in Virginia. 490,000, just in Virginia. We're not talking about the other 13 colonies. We're not talking about the Western territories at this time frame, just in Virginia. Almost 500,000. And that was an actual census in 1860. Grand Rising, Teresa. I think I missed somebody else. Oh, no, I saw that. So that was an actual census. So what Anthony was saying in 1619 was not an actual census. Now, back to the native slavery in the Americas. And for the most part, the majority of slave ownership of natives was done from before 1619, was done on the west coast of America, in Mexico and South America and the Caribbean. And those who were taken as slaves in North America, on the west coast of North America, were mostly sent down to work in the mines in Peru, in Mexico, in Brazil, and all those places, or they were sent to work on cash crop like sugarcane and tobacco and all those sorts of things. Tobacco. And the misnomer, and I gotta admit, I've said it plenty of times, that 90%, 70 to 90% of the native population was wiped out. And I always say disease, but I see that there's a hidden thing here. No, from the research that I was doing last night, the overwhelming majority of indigenous people who were of that 70 to 90% that were wiped out was due to harsh labor conditions and famine, which most of it was famine, in slave camps, working as slaves, backbreaking work. I don't know, even today, we don't have the machinery to go get sugarcane. It's still a backbreaking work to work on a sugarcane farm. So you can imagine how it was then. You can imagine them carrying 30-pound stones all day out of the mines. So there was a constant need for these slaves, and the indigenous people, most of them died out because of the condition of slavery, which did have disease, which did have famine, but it's the condition of slavery that created those situations. So the Caucasians don't want you to know that they just want to say, oh, disease, their bodies weren't really used to it and that sort of thing, of bubonic plague and smallpox. No, they weren't. But if it had not been for the situation of slavery, then just as the Europeans had recovered from those plagues, the native population would have recovered from those plagues in the same way. But they didn't have a chance to, because they were going through famines and they was working, beyond the human body's capabilities to sustain health. And so they died off very quickly as a condition of slavery. So most of the native who were taken as slaves, though, in the Americas, were West Coast, and were sent down into Mexico and all that kind of stuff. So unless your family's from the West Coast, you cannot claim that your family, that they enslaved all of us. Now in the South, up until 1619, prior to 1619, most of the people who worked in the South were some Native American slaves, some indigenous slaves, those that were conquered by the Creek, conquered by the Chickasaw, conquered by the Cherokee, conquered by the Seminole, those, and they traded with them. They gave them rifles. Rifles was the most coveted thing that they would trade slaves that they had captured from other warring tribes to the British colonies. Those people, but then after a while, they had them, and they had indentured workers from Europe. So they had those 7-year indentured workers from Europe, the Irish, the Poles, people of that nature. But they had to pay those people. But then they started getting worried that they were supplying the Seminoles, the Creeks, and Chickasaws, and all of them with too many weapons, and that one day they may be able to rise up against them. Plus, the indigenous slave was able to run away a lot easier and hide amongst other indigenous tribes once they got free and they knew the land. Oh, but before 1619, I would also like to note that many indigenous slaves were sent to Europe and sent to North Africa. You see, this business of slavery is very interesting. Like, most people don't know, and I'm just going to throw this one in there. A lot of people don't know that the main slaves in Africa were people from India, not American Indians, but people from India. That the British used to send Indian people to Africa, especially like Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, that East Coast. They used to send them there to work as slaves. And then they used to take Africans and take them to India to work as slaves. You got to take people off their land. It's the best case scenario. But many people didn't know that they brought natives. How many of y'all knew that they brought native indigenous Americans over to Africa as slaves? I'm sure some of y'all knew they took them to Europe, but how many of y'all knew that they took them to Africa as slaves, especially in the North African area? Y'all know how this do. Y'all got to talk to me. We gonna talk. Randy, you did? You knew they took indigenous people from the Americas to North Africa? Now, interestingly enough, a decent portion of them made it back to the Americas when that ended over in that area. When it ended, they kind of like how a lot of us went to Liberia and certain they came back. Her Debbie saying she didn't know, but yes. So you do have them going into that region as well. I'm moving around like y'all because my knee is hurting like a big dog. Slept wrong, but that was an interesting reminder last night when I went across that. I was like, oh shit, yeah, I forgot about that. Now, back to the story at hand. I was not aware of that fact. Yeah, but they sent them over there. Now, this is prior to 16. This is during from 1492 up until around 1557, 1542 and 1547. Because the interesting thing happens around 1542. In 1542, Spain, who was the primary enslavers of the indigenous Americans, ended its enslavement of indigenous Americans. Now, of course, news travels slow. People try to get away with stuff. Well, we're gonna they did the same thing. The Jim Crow people weren't original. They then used vagrancy laws to enslave people, to enslave those same people that they were not supposed to enslave. You don't get the final end to Spanish slavery of the indigenous people until King Charles II comes into power. And I think it was in and around, see if I can remember right, that was in around 1660. Yeah, in around 1660, 1680. When you have King Charles II who says, all right, for real, y'all, for real. Slavery's over. Spanish slavery is over. We're not enslaving the indigenous people. As a matter of fact, we're going to give them all the same equal rights as regular citizens, Spanish citizens. That interesting, right? Now, it didn't hurt the Spanish too much, and this was a calculated move, because by the time you get to 1680, the importation of African slaves to enslaving the native population was about equal. It was about equal. It was replacing it. The South, once 1619 up to 1680, the South went all in on importing African slaves. Another thing that caused this situation was that I want you guys to take some time, look up King Philip. Make sure I'm saying it right. I need King Philip II. Yeah, King Philip's War. King Philip's War from 1676. King Philip's War was when it was a Native American war against a Native American uprising by Metacom, or it's called Metacom's Rebellion, up in the New England area, where New England Native people, rebelled. And after this rebellion, although they have been primarily using indigenous slavery up in the Northeast, they then began to start looking at the African slavery. They would start saying because it was too easy for them to rebel, and they were too successful in their rebellion. So at that point, they was like, nah, but we're gonna do most of our enslavement of the indigenous people out into the west, out west, and we're gonna enslave them out there. But we're gonna now push the transatlantic slavery. Now, after around by the time you get to 1680, the transatlantic slavery is going strong. It's going real strong. So now they're shipping. They're shipping. Most of these African slaves, though, are still going to the Caribbean, and they're going down to South America. Portugal was very strong then, and Portugal had no interest in North America. They were bringing most of their slaves to Brazil, and because they're working the shit out of them in Brazil. So they were mainly focused on Brazil. So you didn't have the Portuguese bringing many slaves to the North Americas. So the Caribbean was the main place. Now, in North America, though, slavery of the Africans still became very popular. It became so popular that there are literal laws that draws a distinction between African slaves and indigenous slaves. At one point there was legislation that was looking to ban indigenous slavery, but maintain African slavery. But then it got repealed, and so indigenous slavery continued, and then it got repealed again. I mean, then it got set up again. The reason why they did this is because by enslaving indigenous people, the Europeans didn't want to cause further wars between, this is in the 1700s, didn't want to cause further wars between the 5 so-called civilized tribes, because that was the biggest issue they were facing going west, is the native indigenous population. So the 5 civilized tribes, the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Creek, can't remember the other 2, the Tacoma, I think the Yamasee and somebody else, they tried that these are supposed to be their allies, so they didn't want to have problems with them, right? They didn't really care for the Seminoles, because the Seminoles, if you escaped to the Seminoles, they would allow the African to be a part of them. As a matter of fact, even the native had distinctions. The Cherokee had the Cherokee Cherokee bloodline, and you had Cherokee free man. They had distinctions to show that they were not the same damn people. All right, they were not. By this time frame, they're not the same. You don't trust none of the slave stories. It's all cap. Why is it so important for us to be descendants of slaves? They send them for employee slaves, and so you're saying that there were no slaves in the Americas? That's just a denial of history if you're saying that. And everybody at some point, every culture, every group, every country has endured some form of slavery. And this is what I was saying in the very beginning, and Grand Rising to Haven. Our history is long. It has slavery is a bump in the road, but our history goes further back than that. We have to know all of our history, and you have to know all your history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the part you like and the part you don't like. And we're having this conversation because of a leakage conversation yesterday. All right, what you got there, Randy? Yes, many slaves were took from these lands to Africa and the islands, as well as those that came from Africa to the Americas and the islands. A good site that provides some good data about transatlantic slave trade is Intra-American Slave Trade. Okay. But where was I at? So now, mind you, those Cherokees, those Chickasaws and Creeks and all them, they took African slaves. They took African slaves as well. So they participated. So some people might be, and some of those were taken by women who had lost their husbands and there weren't any native men, and they took them as slave husbands. In the same way that you can see people throughout history take slave wives, they took some of them as slave husbands. So a person could have Chickasaw, Cherokee, Creek in their bloodline because of that reason, a slave wife, slave husband, or adopted, bought by them, and then later on became intermarried with somebody. You could have that, but you still got both. And this is always my argument when I'm dealing with these people. My heritage is both. I don't have to claim one over the other. It's both. But the overwhelming majority of my heritage is West African. It is not indigenous to America. And every black person in America is not indigenous to America. Some of us don't even have a one drop of indigenous blood in America. A lot of us don't know how a Harriet Tubman name is Harriet Tubman. I always struggle with the story of slaves buying their freedom, but they were supposed to work for free. Please make it make sense for me. So okay, so you have to go all the way back really to the days of the Sumerians. But one of the ideas within slavery that was carried forward is that if certain slaves, if they worked for certain masters, when they finished all the work that their so-called master had for them, they would allow them to create their own enterprise. So there were people who baked cakes. There were people who would hire them to go and literally find a job at a general store, or at a dock, or any kind of work that they can get outside of the work that their so-called master would allow them to do. And oftentimes, here's one of the messed up parts about it, DeHaven. Let's say you are allowed to sell goods, like you can sew or something, and you're selling bonnets. And you talk to your master, hey, I want to sell these bonnets because one day I want to buy my freedom. And they was cool enough to let you do it. Because some of them, like in the South, a lot of them were like, hell no, they were assholes. This is mostly happening up north and middle of the East Coast. But you would be able to go and you selling it. Let's say you're selling it for $1. This asshole of a master would say, okay, you sell it for, you can go sew it, you can make it, you can go and you can but when you sell one for $1, you got to pay me 50 cents. I want half your money. That's how to make it make sense. They would have that opportunity to go make some extra money on the side, so they had a side hustle basically, but they would still have to give half, if not more than half, of their money of their side hustle to their masters. And this is why them buying their freedom didn't happen as often, or it could take 20, 30 years for them to buy their freedom. The book Uncle Tom is based on not John Hanson. I forgot his dang old name. But within the actual story of his life, he was a preacher, and he was able to make a deal to buy his freedom for $1,000, and with his master dude. And I hate using that term, but that's just what it was at the time frame. He made his extra money by preaching. And then when he did get $1,000, he went to the dude to make the payment. The dude screwed him over from the $1,000 and told him if he go make another $1,000, he can get his freedom again, because he happened to catch old boy when old boy was losing some land and he needed the money to buy some more land to keep his land. And that's when he escaped. After that ordeal, then he escaped. But there's more. It's different than what you may see in Gone with the Wind. There were opportunities to make money and buy your freedom. In the trans-Sahara slave trade with Islam, if you didn't allow your slave to do that, then Allah looked shameful upon you. which is a weird thing. Like you can own a slave in Islam, but you have to make a way for them to get their freedom. Otherwise, it'll be held against you as punishment. What are my thoughts on $5 Indians? Isn't that the $5 Indian? What is that? Is that that's the 5 civilized tribes, right? So they sold out. They said, you know what? I don't think we're gonna beat these Europeans. So let's act like them. Let's take on their religion, and all that kind of thing, and let's lose ourselves in them. And they enslaved my people, so fuck them. That's how I feel about them. If that's the same people, I don't know what else a $5 Indian is. These were the ones who married white people, Caucasians. I don't know. I've heard that term before, but I never really investigated that term because I try to stay out of that argument most of the time. Thank y'all for liking it up over there on TikTok because that helps to keep the channel from some whiny ass person shutting it down. So thank you. Continue. And I need y'all to hit some likes and keep commenting on Facebook and YouTube. But I don't even know where we was at. So in this, I know we got up until where the Transatlantic started taking over because they didn't want to upset the contract they had with the 5 civilized tribes plus other contracts that they was writing. They had the war with Tecumseh and all these other native tribes. So the European it was a strategic move to go away from the indigenous slave trade and push more of the transatlantic slave trade. But another distinction, see, this is one of those things that I have to look at. If it was all indigenous people, why are there so many distinctions between the Cherokee blood and the Cherokee freedman? They knew the difference between Africans and indigenous people. Why is there the distinction? Even in the 13th Amendment, most people don't realize that in the 13th Amendment, they originally applied it to all slavery. But they originally applied it to all slavery, but then there was a court case in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, no, it only pertains to African descent slavery. So out in the Western territories, those indigenous slaves are still slaves. So they didn't free all slaves initially. It wasn't until a year later when the federal government then said, no, it applies to all slaves. And then they also went and forced the Cherokee, especially, and the Chickasaw to give up their slaves. Because even though we do Juneteenth, which happened in, what was that, 65, there were still African slaves in Oklahoma, in the Cherokee territories, under the Cherokee Nation. They still had African slaves. And it took the federal government in 1866 to go and free those slaves. So all the ancestors and all the slavery wasn't over because somebody showed up in Galveston, Texas. So even though I understand Juneteenth, it is not 100%. One of the best explanations to that question so far, my pushback will be this: the person that created the cotton press was not able to profit off of it. Went to his so-called master, researching the native people of Philadelphia. I question everything about slavery. We keep moving. There we go. I didn't know that Maryland and Virginia were a part of Pennsylvania during that time. Yeah, the state maps, they look crazy as you continue to go. Grand Rising Wade, how you doing? True. Now, here's the thing: if you did invent something, if you were like, not every slave was out in the field doing this or doing that. Not, a lot of slaves worked in small farms. If you invented something, created something, you didn't have rights. You didn't have the right to claim it as your intellectual property. It's not like today. One of the things we can't do is take any of the thought process of how life functions today and put it back then. Everybody can know that your servant, your slave, created this cotton gin, but you getting all the credit. Thomas Edison, and this was going even after slavery. Thomas Edison, it was a black man who figured out the filament for the light bulb, but Thomas Edison gets all the credit because my man didn't have the rights to be able to claim that. Grand Rising, Dwayne. He had the rights to be able to claim it. So oftentimes your inventions, if you invented something or something was actually worth any money, no, they took advantage of it. In the same way as I was explaining, if you were allowed to have a side hustle back then, they're taking half, if not more than half, of the money that you make. And unfortunately, that was common practice. That was common practice with the Trans-Saharan slave trade. That was common practice during the Roman Empire, during the Akkadian Empire, the Sumerian Empire, the Ashanti, the Zulus, everybody. If you were an enslaved personnel and you made some money, your master actually gets the larger share of that money that you made. It was a common mindset, which is one of those things that I always find interesting, that how can people separated by oceans or great lands or mountains or whatever still have this common theme of how they do things. There has to be the ether. That's when people say, oh, you start talking about ether, it has to be a shared mind frequency that we all can tap into, because it seems that we all tap into this mindset. But I thought I was going to have Anthony up here to go against me, but he ain't show up. So all in all, and for y'all who got here late, y'all just going to have to go back and watch the beginning of this, because we've been going for about an hour, almost an hour now. The fact of the matter is this. Was there indigenous slavery going on in the Americas, especially prior to 1619? Yes. Most of us who are here, though, those were not our ancestors. Just they weren't. Because most of those indigenous slaves were sent to the Caribbean, sent to Mexico, and sent down into South America. Very few were on the East Coast. So your family has been on the East Coast for the majority of your generations. Very few indigenous people were enslaved. There was more indigenous people who were enslaved from the East Coast who were enslaved that were sent to the Caribbean, to Europe, and to North Africa than stayed on the East Coast. The majority of slaving of the indigenous people happened on the West Coast, not the East Coast, especially with the Comanche and the Apache. Those two, and there's a couple other ones, suffered the most losses in that whole deal. But after seeing the success of the Portuguese in their slave transportation from Africa to Brazil, 1619, the first ships arrived in Jamestown, Virginia, with 20 to 30 slaves. A few days later, the ship Treasurer arrives with even more slaves, and then the transatlantic slave trade gets the big boost. And by 1680, 70, well, not even 70 years, 60 years later, it has become such a dominant part that it replaces the indigenous slave trade for the most part. There's still some going on, but it replaces it. Just like the government get parts of our check. Yep. So it replaces it. And if Virginia, when people say, okay, so from the beginning of the indigenous slave trade up until after the Civil War, the total population of people that is estimated that were enslaved, because slavery ended in its totality in 1866. So from 1492 to 1866, the number is estimated based on the amount of records that can be found. Indigenous slavery was 2.5 to 5, 2 million to 5.5 million. The African slave trade accounted for, and this is a census that was taken, the African slave trade accounted for about 12.5 million people. Now, as far as the census, at the time frame that slavery ended, there was only about 6 million slaves in the African descent slave people in the Americas when they did the census. (1868), I believe that was when it was placed. But it is very, it is very feasible to have that many people going back and forth, and it is very feasible. And especially when if you're only accounting for how many slaves came to the Americas, then yeah, you're only looking at about 2 million, 3 million. The overwhelming majority went to the Caribbean and went to South America. This is why even today, there are more people of African descent in South America than there are in the United States. Way more. The $5 Indian was the opportunistic white men who wanted access to the land, food rations, and where these people were more to explore the Dawes Commission. And I started to read more about the Dawes Commission last night, but I had already read so much that my eyes were starting to burn a little bit. Oh, but I do know about that. And you still got that today, where you go to a minority business function and you'll see a bunch of white men who got their business in their Caucasian wife's name, and that way they can get the one minority benefits. No, DeHaven, I've never heard of Octavius Cato or the Lenape people of Delaware. I haven't. Enlighten me. Enlighten me, my dear. But so you still had a higher population of people from African descent, and they were able to tell the difference. And it would be one thing if only the Europeans were making the distinction, but the indigenous people, the indigenous tribes, were also making a distinction between those of African descent and those of native descent. And this is even before the Dawes Commission. You got the 5 civilized tribes, the Comanche, you got all the damn near every Native American tribe made a distinction between fully blood and those who were from African descent. Now, some of them did have different rules. If a woman had a baby with if you had a mixed baby, just like how black people today would see somebody who's mixed and say, no, they black, and we just claim them, the whole thing. Like Obama, he just black. Nah, he mixed blood. He mixed. Most Native Americans, most of the indigenous people, if you married one of them and you had a baby, then that baby the father wasn't considered, full blood, but the baby was considered full blood. So you do get some people who will have that kind of situation. A lot of the northern New England tribes, though, they wouldn't give them full blood, but give them mulatto status. So you really have to look at and see what tribe you're talking about and how that is determined. Like with the Creek, hell no. The Creek Indians, you had to, I think it was the father had to be native in order for you to be considered native. No, the mother had to be native in order for the child to be considered native. If the mother wasn't native, then that child was not bloodline native. And for me, and for my kids, that's what's one of the hard parts. That was from as far as if they look down my family line, which is only on my mother's side, then they're not going to be considered in the Creek family. But on their mother's side of the family, it's a little bit different if they were to do the work. I'm a man, he done. I'm a man. God dang it, keep moving. He done everything Martin Luther King did before him, and Jackie Robinson. Oh, my apologies, David. I look at the picture. Oh, that's a little. I put my glasses on. That's a little baby. My bad. Without my glasses, the little picture's a little blurry, and I thought it was a young lady, but that's a little baby. Cute little baby. Octavius Valentine. We often learn something here. At least I am. Octavius Valentin Cato, February 22nd, 1839 to October 10th, 1871. Was an American educator, intellectual, and civil rights activist. He became principal of the male students of the Institute of Colored Youth, where he had been educated, born free in Charleston, South Carolina. In the prominent mixed race family, he moved north as shit. He moved north as a boy. I hate Facebook sometimes when you're trying to scroll, trying to read some education. He moved north as a boy with his family. After completing his education, he went on to become a teacher and became a civil rights activist. He is known to be a top cricket and baseball player in the 19th century in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was a Republican. He was shot and killed on Election Day violence in Philadelphia, where ethnic Irish and of the Democratic Party, who were anti-Reconstructionists and had opposed black suffrage against the black men and prevent. Okay, interesting. Never knew that. Oh, that's your son? Outstanding, sir. You know, if I had just put it on there, even without my glasses, when it blows it up. Okay. Didn't know about that. You know, they skip a lot of people in as far as our history. Raquel, how you doing? Marker. So here's the thing about it. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if, and this is where I think me and the Haven are going to be in agreement, definitely. What does it matter if we were indigenous, or if your family was indigenous, or if they were African descent? Either way, the Europeans came, conquered, and enslaved. Whether there were time frames where tribes worked with them in order for them to gain weapons to fight their own wars, or when everything started to become kidnapping, it doesn't matter. At some point within the whole process, we all got screwed. We all got screwed. And the question is, okay, you know, we got screwed. We all know that. We know that even after the 13th Amendment was ratified, and then after it was enforced, and then just as DeHaven just informed us of Octavius Cato, even when winning an election, you get murdered. And I bet you people weren't held accountable. You get murdered. We've had our leaderships, we've had our marches and all this stuff. We've gained some ground, but we still got a long ass way to go. All of us. One of the worst things that I saw, one of the things that I saw when I went on a cross country trip 2.5 years ago is some of those people on the Native American reservations. Shit, they living in squalor. They got this whole big ass casino, but they living in squalor. They living like hell. When I was in the Marine Corps, there were people who came off the reservation to join the Marine Corps because they were trying to escape that life. And they were telling me some of the things that go on there. Some of the ways that women are treated on those reservations. treated like trash, like trash. And the fight between the indigenous and the African descent has still been going on. The Cherokee blood versus the Cherokee freemen, that shit was just settled in 2007. In 2007, just settled. It's still, the argument is still there. Yep. The Moors did. If the Moors had never taught them jokers civilization, a higher form of civilization, I ain't gonna say civilization, but a higher form of civilization, then they wouldn't have been able to do what they did. Yeah, it is bad. I saw reservations in New Mexico. Um, shit was horrible. Saw reservations in Arizona. Saw reservations in Oklahoma, and it's like, God dang, y'all, this some bullshit. You know that y'all living like this, but they are. It's like you in Tornado Alley. It's Trailer Park City. Like what the hell? And dogs and shit running around looking all mangy, and people looking raggedy, drunk motherfuckers all over the place. I was like, you're not being a benefit to your people. They do. They flood those communities with alcohol and drugs because, you got to think about it. It's a whole nation inside of America. They don't like that. America don't like that. They want to end those reservations. The worst, if they can make them horrible, then they can come in and, well, you guys just not doing a good job. We're going to have to come and take over. Or get the people in such distress that the people don't want to be a separate nation on the reservations anymore. But at the end of the day, we all got fucked. All of our ancestors during that time frame got screwed over. Now, before that time frame, our ancestors, whether indigenous or African, they built great civilizations. They built communities. They had their problems. They weren't all perfect. They had their own forms of slavery. They had their own wars. They had their own patriarchal systems. Hell, the Aztecs and the Mayans and the Incas, for all the glory of what they built, whether it's Teotihuacan or Machu Picchu, for all that they be built, for all their engineering greatness, them motherfuckers were still sacrificing people to some fake ass god. So we can't do this altruistic idea that our ancestor was just living in such peace and tranquility until the Caucasian came around. No, they was doing some fucked up shit too. But we did build great civilizations. Our ancestors built Timbuktu. They built Adam's calendar. They built um, the Zulu Empire, the Ashanti Empire, the Nubio-Kemetic empires. They built this, down in Sudan, and they built structures and built with clay bricks and irrigated canals. I'm looking at doing a video talking about how the Sumerians actually weren't the first civilization. I talked about it a while back where I said the Mesopotamia is not the cradle of civilization, but they learned all their stuff from the Nubians and the Kemetic, and the Kemetic learned it from the Nubians. So our history is far greater and far more intertwined with the world. And it's a weird thing how for a while these people know about each other. Then the Sahara Desert becomes a desert, creates this big ass barrier, and then for centuries people forget about each other, and then they have to rediscover each other. It's an odd thing in history of how that happens. That there's the mystical land that is on the other side of the desert, that's lush and green. But the Europeans tell us those were the aliens that built those things for them. Yeah. Now there is a difference. You can tell the difference between everything that was built after the Younger Dryas period and everything that was built before the Younger Dryas period. The pyramids that were built before the Younger Dryas period was done with technologies and abilities that the people after the Younger Dryas did not have. Like the pyramids in Sudan, in over here, some of the ones over here, they are not as well built as like the Great Pyramids, which the Great Pyramids were built before the Younger Dryas. So even though they tried to duplicate it, it is not to the same degree. So they did build pyramids. They just didn't build all of them. They didn't build all of them. I think Black people should look at our ancestry historically objectively and not narrow-minded. I think there are some truth for both arguments that Black people are indigenous from Africa or Europe. No, and that's all I'm saying is that you get the ones who follow. I think his name is Dane Calloway. You get the ones that follow him, and it's we all indigenous. We all indigenous. Where the slave ships at? Well, two things about the slave ship. One, a group of Black archaeologists off the coast of West Africa have found sunken slave ships. So that's one. So they did exist. Two, just like anything that is created, once it becomes outdated for whatever purpose it was being used for, it is then repurposed for something else. That would be like me sitting here and saying that, Model T cars, they didn't exist. Ain't nobody had a Model T car. Where they at? Look, they've been scrapped, melted down, crunched, reformulated. Hell, my car outside can have parts from a Model T because the metal had been melted down and reformed into some other kind of metal, and bam, now it's a Ford Mustang. It's repurposed. The ships were repurposed to carry different cargo for other reasons. Right. And I especially believe in Alabama and Louisiana, they probably did this a lot. What Dwayne is saying is that they used the ship to build houses. Because once shipping changed in the South, they built all them houses. Them houses built out of wood. I'm like, what the hell? And some of those houses bow. It's like the wood bows a bit. I'm like, what? That's a weird looking ass house. Why did they bow that? All these houses got these bowed out parts to them. And it's not like it's a French window. It'd be like the side of the house. Like, why they build this house where the side of the house bows? And then it dawned on me one time, shit, I bet you that used to be a boat. Yeah, exactly. Way saying like they saying, oh man, we use that shit for slaves. We can't do nothing else with it. What? Move some cattle around. Huh? Move some cotton. I mean, it's like once that's over, then hey, I'm in Charleston. Shit, I can't go get slaves no more. Either I'm gonna go back to my home country because some of these people weren't American. All of them weren't in the colony. They was from, their home was either in Africa or their home was up in Europe. So a lot of them just went home. Others who were Americans or colonists were like, well, I guess we can import products from the south to the north and import products from the north to the south. Just like we do with ships today. We just move it around for a different purpose. So that argument is dumb. It's a dumb argument. Sometimes when people come to me with that one, I just look at them. And even though I hate mouth noises, I do that. Just want to whoop your ass. Just whoop the dumb out of you. So if you ever go to Costa Rica, some of the old areas, those houses were built out of slave ships. Exactly, Dwayne. That's what I'm talking about. I ain't been to Costa Rica, not like that, but yeah. I like your content, brother. Dwayne Calloway will eat you alive on that topic. I don't think Dwayne Calloway could eat me alive on that topic at all. I've listened to him plenty of times. I've had conversations He cannot, because he reminds me of someone who is stuck on the Bible. No matter how much evidence you provide for him, he's going to sit up there and deny it. He's just going to, like, that didn't happen. I remember showing a certain person the fact that slave ships were found off the coast of Africa. Ah, that's fake news. Bro, the archaeologists, the divers, they were black people, and they were purposely looking for it. You can show that all three groups had a distinction within law that shows that they differentiated between the African descent and the indigenous people. You can see where all the slave purchases were done in with the Spanish in on the West Coast, and those people going to the South. You can see the documentation of the Carolinians, especially sending indigenous slaves to the Caribbean and to South America. And you can say it till you're blue in the face, and they will sit up there and just look at you and just be like, no, 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 no. I understand just your analysis. I'm not going as deep as I would go if I'm debating somebody. If I'm debating someone, it's totally different. If I'm debating someone, plus in a debate, you hitting certain points and certain topics. So I would have a deeper line into that. On here, I don't go as deep. I think black people should look. Okay, you said that. Did I read that before? Mm-mm. The debate is totally different. It's a different arena. Um, on here, I try not to overload people with information, because if you just think about everything that I have talked about, I've pretty much talked about everything from slavery from 1492 all the way up to 1868. 1868. 1868. That's a lot of time. That's 400 years. It's almost 400 years of history involving the Spanish, the Portuguese, the and the British. I didn't even get into the French, and their portion that they played with enslaving indigenous people through the whole French territory from Louisiana through the Mississippi. Think about the Louisiana Purchase, all that area. I didn't even get into the French and their aspects of it. I left them out and barely touched on the Portuguese, because the Spanish were the primary people that did the most enslavement of indigenous people. And then I didn't break it down based on different states and how different states handle different things. Then we didn't even get into the Indian Removal Act and how they were allowed to take their African slaves with them. Like many people just look at Jackson's Indian Removal Act and just see that, oh, the Trail of Tears, oh, the Cherokee and the Creeks and all them had to move the Oklahoma Territory. And then they moved them there, but they were allowed to take and within that part of that documentation, it talks about how they were allowed to take their African descent slaves with them. And then I could then get into, when it was the Oklahoma Territory, how when the Civil War was coming close, Oklahoma, because of Texas, was first afraid that Texas would invade Oklahoma. New Mexico was also afraid that Texas would invade New Mexico, because New Mexico wanted to outlaw indigenous slavery, but then Texas, being a slave state, didn't want two non-slave states surrounding it. But in Oklahoma, you had portions of people, African descent, not indigenous, who left Oklahoma and went to Mexico, where slavery was outlawed, so that they can be free, and started their own towns in Mexico. And these are African descent people, and they are still there. They're still there. They actually celebrate Juneteenth. They're still there. So, and then how New Mexico put their enslavement laws back in place because they were afraid of Texas. So there's a lot more that I could go into to demonstrate the separation between indigenous slavery and African slavery. But like I said, we would have so much, and I would have to ignore what everybody is saying the whole time, because this would be a freaking 8-hour lecture. to go through all of that. I remember asking him, how did whites get over here since the ships couldn't get over here? Right. And when they say that there's no way they could have got, that many Africans over into this area, I'm like, yeah, how do white people get over here? All of a sudden they can't get here. And then when they like to point out that one boat that had like 200-300 people stacked, laying down, stack. Most people don't realize that boat design occurred in in the mid 1600s. Mid 1800s. That wasn't the normal slave ship that went from 1492 up till the end of the transatlantic slave trade. So not mid, it was early 1800s. That ship was commissioned, it was built, it made one voyage, and so many people died that the ship was declared by the British Crown to be inhumane, and it didn't sail anymore. That was not the common ship that came across the Atlantic. And then the trip, many people think the trip was like 6 months long. No, it's like 2.5 months. Depending upon the time of year, it could be less than 2.5 months. So, it's a lot more. Paul Robeson lineage has been traced back to the Lenape people in Delaware. Their chief was a European family. I believe that Robeson's family looking into the lineage. Okay. Yeah, and there are tons of smaller tribes. Like my lady Angelina, I was impressed because documentation, it's hard, man. I'm telling you, it is not easy to find your family history in this country if you are native or not. Now, if you are native, I'm gonna tell you something. I'll tell you this part. It would be easier to find out if you have native family than if you don't, or if you don't. If you got native family, more than likely your ass should be able to find it. Like she has, and I'm gonna get a copy of it from her, a digital copy of it from her, and show y'all one day. She has this document that shows, I think it's a great grandfather, and it's interesting. It's a great grandfather. He's a chief, and then everybody under his chiefdom has his name, and he declares them all part of that native tribe. And her family, I don't remember if it was the Foy side of her family or the Furrier side of her family. Um, but it's easier for you to find native records than it is for you to find where your family came from, what ship, and from where that ship, and those ship logs. And for people who say, "Oh, it's a big facade," they fake those logs. Dude, don't you realize that they have to pay taxes on all that shit? Ain't nobody faking that many logs. For what? Just to trick you into thinking that man, please. Oh no, but there's a lot more information. I don't ever feel disrespected. If that's your thought, that's your thought. It's fine with me. Um, you know, when you listen to a debate, who you decide is the winner or loser is personal opinion for the most part. And I'm gonna tell y'all something that's crazy. I was going against Dane Calloway, but the person that I was so-called dating at the time frame was such a fan of his that she was mad at me. I'm talking mad at me for like a good week. Didn't want to talk to me, didn't want to see me, didn't want to deal with me, because she was mad, because she loved her some Dane Calloway. And I was just like, hey, I just look at facts. I don't have an emotional fight in this. Have you heard about Pichikatawa tribe in America. They were a Native American tribe that were mostly uh, counted as Negro or mulatto. I have not. Let me tell you, I don't spend as much time studying the indigenous conversation. One, because the majority of my family is not indigenous, so it doesn't really pertain to me that much. And then what's the benefit? I'm looking at this tribe. They look like a bunch of they. All right, they're up in Maryland. So they just got federally recognized in 2012. Oh, so they was part of the Algonquins. They're part of the Algonquin language family. Oh, and shit, we didn't even get into the Mormons, and the Mormons were hell on the on the indigenous slave trade. That was another thing that almost kept them out of becoming a state because they wanted to continue their slave trade of the indigenous people in Utah, the Ute. And then don't get me started on migrations. Because in order to do this one, a lot of them they also deny migration, the whole out of Africa theory, and want to say that they were here. I literally heard the jokers talk about, and they try to bring up Pangea. I was like, are you freaking kidding me? Pangea? At that point, I threw up in my mouth a little bit when they brought up Pangea. I'll research that tribe more, a little bit more later on. They continued to practice the culture, but were not regarded as native, but considered outsiders. I only responded because you brought the brother's name. Oh no, it's fine, Taylor. No problem whatsoever. That's usually who people always want to bring up to me when they talk to me about it. They always want to bring him up. I haven't paid attention to him in probably 10 years, for the most part. People have to remember this was ran by British rule for the most part, and they had to pay British taxes. That's why they went to war. Yeah, and they had to pay taxes for all that. You ain't gonna just pay taxes for no scam. That ain't gonna work. We're not doing that. Cali Supreme Court. Most natives were called Negro or Black as far as classifications. Hmm. And that was in 1854. Okay, and that's another thing about it. See, that whole thing you have to get into like what California did in 1854. You know, it's a lot that you can deal with when it comes to that whole argument, and that's one of the reasons why I kind of stay away from it. You know, if it wasn't, and I'm gonna cuss that joke out. You're gonna have us come on here talking about this and then not show up. You just wait, Anthony. I ain't gonna help you with your VA. West Philly history. Let me guess, DeHaven. You up in Philly, or you from Philly? I'll check on the links when after it's over. Nick from Tennessee, late. Nah, you all right. Um, yeah, it's interesting. Oh man, the dude who I'm having a meeting with, I wish he was here right now because he's Jamaican, and a lot of indigenous North indigenous. Yeah, I figure because you know a lot about that area up there, and most people know more about the area that they're living in or that they're from. He's Jamaican, and since a lot of indigenous North American people were sent to Jamaica, I wonder if what he knows. He's older than me. I think he's older than me. Yeah, he's older than me. I wonder what he knows about Jamaican history concerning uh, indigenous American slaves being brought down to Jamaica. Okay, so here's the thing, Stephen Parker. If you're going to come on here and have a conversation, you're going to be civil, or your ass can get blocked. Because coming on my thing, talking about some get your facts straight before you open your mouth. Y'all say that shit in the comments after I make a video and all that kind of stuff. That's cool, but we live right now, and I don't really say nothing to your little sideways comments then. But if you're gonna come on here, I will be respectful to you as long as you're respectful to me. But you come on here talking like that, and you can get kicked to the curb because don't nobody really care about your opinion at the end of the day if you can't be civil. So don't come on here with that BS. Me and DeHaven had some disagreements, and we talked like men about it. I can have it. Me and E. Taylor had disagreement. We talked like men about it. Don't come in here talking like a boy. We've spoken before, my friend, but it's been probably 6 months. Oh, is that right? 6 months. Can't get no love from Nick. Nick ain't treating us right. Nah, you're all right, man. I know people have lives, things are going on. So, but yeah, I don't know how long. I don't know exactly what time Rob is gonna get. He's supposed to get here, but it'd be great if he was here because I really would want to know what they taught in Jamaica concerning indigenous people being enslaved from the Carolinas and brought down to Jamaica. That would. I've never thought to ask a Jamaican person that question before, but I'm gonna ask one today. Is there any Jamaicans over here on any of these things? Anybody Jamaican or Caribbean and got a little know and have something about that? I'm really curious to know that, to see what, because I like the fact that in this discussion, DeHaven is up in Philly, so he got information about Philly and other places like that, and other people have other information. Because at the end of the day, sharing information is very, very important for us to continue to build community. You got to build that community. And that's always my other thing when it comes to this whole discussion. It seems like it's something that's been put out there to divide us. Like, let me distract you from the economic downturns that you're experiencing and that your ancestors experienced. The fact that you're going that in a lot of areas we're going backwards from what our ancestors was doing in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. In some ways, we've gone backwards. And it seems like let's distract you because I don't want you to realize that you're going backwards. Because if you are distracted and divided, then I can keep you going backwards. Right? We used to because we were forced to. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that, our ancestors in those after slavery, they came together and actually had more general wealth than what we have today because they paid for everything. They owned more land, had more businesses because they didn't have a choice. They couldn't go shop with, anybody else. And of course, we know what the jealousy did to that, the hatred did to those things. Those hatreds and jealousies can't do the same thing today. So they got to keep us divided so that we don't realize that, oh, if we built a Tulsa today, if we built a Oscarville today, if we built a Wilmington today, if we built the Rosewood today, they can't come in here and use eminent domain like they did before. They can't come in here and burn and flood out like they did before. They can't do that. We have the lawyers now for the eminent domain, for the flooding. We have guns now and military trained personnel for the I'm gonna burn you out, shoot you out bullshit. So they know they can't do that today. So what's the program? Separate you. Even though both sides of the ancestry went through some form of slavery in the Americas, let me separate you. Let me get y'all fighting over who's indigenous and who's African descent. Let me keep y'all separate. You're only 47 million of y'all. You're only representing about what is it, like 19% of the population? Let me keep y'all divided. Because there's no other point of that conversation. It's really no other point. Because both our ancestors were screwed over. Whether you jump on one side or the other, whether you got proof of one side or the other, they both got screwed over. So let me keep you divided. I don't want you to take over this county and then become the superintendent over this county and change the education in this county. I don't want you taking over the county and deciding on green space in that county, deciding on new construction of houses, what businesses can be in this county. No, we want to still force you to have all the pawn shops, all the liquor stores, all the churches, all the mosques and synagogues, and we want you to still have all the low-income housing. We still want to redline your community. We don't want you in there doing things that's going to uplift your community. We don't want you making deals with big box companies that can upgrade the level of your community. We can't have that. Got to keep you divided. Y'all fight over where y'all ancestors came from. We enslaved all them motherfuckers, but y'all fight over that. We fought wars against all of them. We won for the most part. We won the battle. We won the wars. We lost some battles. Matter of fact, in those battles, we're going to say that when we lost, it was a massacre, but when we won, it was a battle. I remember my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Ragsdale, he was the first person to point that out to me. He said, did you ever notice that when the Europeans lost, it was a massacre? When the Europeans won, it was a battle. How many of y'all ever recognize that? It's all about divide and conquer. Make the majority into a bunch of minorities. Right. That's what it is right now. The majority is broken up into a bunch of minorities. They kidnapped more indigenous people from here and took them to the Caribbean islands and Europe, and then the Africans they brought over here. No, it was about equal. No, it wasn't about equal. They brought more Africans. When you look at it, North and South America and the Caribbean, if you just look at North America, then that would be true. Who said that? Kara. That would be true if you looked at just North America. But when you include Central and South America and the Caribbean, they brought more Africans over than they did enslaved indigenous. And some of that was just time. It was the transatlantic slave trade lasted longer than the indigenous slave trade by the main people who was doing it. That's why I say it's a lot into it, because the Spanish were the primary ones to do it, but the Spanish ended that slave trade. It only lasted for like 60 or 70 years that the Spanish were doing it. And they were the primary ones to move indigenous people. The Portuguese had already started moving Africans during that same time frame. And then once the Spain stopped with the indigenous, the British colonies were still doing it, but they weren't moving as many. And then they start, then when they, and at the same time, they were moving Africans and indigenous during the same time frame. And then they stopped the indigenous, but they were still moving Africans. So the highest estimated number of indigenous slave movement was 5 million. The highest African estimated number is 12.5 million. But who had more, who had less? Y'all know I'm just a person who cares about facts. But in the grand scheme of it, it don't matter. It don't matter. It's like one guy that I had a falling out with that I thought we was gonna be cool. Because I got to a point where when I said, "What you gonna do about it? You gonna go get you some land? You gonna file the paperwork? You gonna organize big enough to get you some land and prove it to the government? Get your land, have your casino, create your nation, all this kind of stuff. Are you gonna do all that?" And he was like, "Nah, I just want to make the people aware." Okay, then stop talking to me. Well, I told him initially, stop talking to me about that. And then he got into all this cussing and start using the, and y'all know I can't stand the N word. He started doing all that. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to just walk away, young fella, because I will whoop your ass. You keep on calling me that. I tolerate that less than a person of color than I would from a Caucasian. I can halfway understand a Caucasian using that word. They still gonna catch it, but I can halfway understand them using it. I have never been able to understand, and I'm talking about since I was a child. I have never been able to understand the usage of that word. I don't ever. There was never a time in my memory that I used that word. Mm-mm. Cats don't want to hear that. No, they don't. But and people don't. It's work. I'm gonna tell you, it's work, and it's gonna be hard work, and it's gonna be, you're gonna have to do extra. People don't want to do extra. Words do signify intention. People don't want to do extra. You got to go. You need some stuff, and if you wanted to support the black businesses in your community, you gonna have to go. Everything gonna be there. Now, not everything. You ain't gonna be able to do everything. You might do some fruits and vegetables, but you gonna have to go to Kroger, Publix, Piggly Wiggly's, Food Line, whatever you got in your Trader Joe's. You're gonna have to go to whatever that big box is. You're gonna have to. Some of your money is gonna go there, but as much as your money as possible should go to a black business, and it should go to one that's in your community. And those businesses need to hire other people of the community. Those businesses need to make sure that they're giving the best possible products and customer service that they possibly can. I'm telling businesses, if you're a business owner, if you ever a business owner, you listen to this, don't expect folks to come to your business simply because you're black. Like if this lounge was dirty, then that's a problem. If if it was stank all the time, if I didn't air it out, let's say I just left all the smoke in here. If I didn't air it out, I can't expect anybody to come here. If I don't have the right inventory, I can't expect people to come here. That's why I'm doing a capital raise right now because I need some more inventory. I need to do a capital raise because I need more inventory. I need to get my inventory back to 250 boxes at least. So if you're not running a good business, don't expect anybody to come to your business because you're black. And stop loading up businesses in the same spot. I can go to a part of town on Covington Highway. There's about 12 damn Caribbean restaurants on that street. That's too many. You only need like 2 or 3 on that street. You purchase land here, and now you're purchasing land in Ghana. Yeah, see, Dwayne Powell says African American, he purchased land in America, and he purchased land in Africa. And purchasing land, got to buy the land. And keep paying your taxes on the land in America. Now in Ghana, you're not going to have to keep paying taxes. I think Ghana, yeah. I think Ghana is one of the countries where when you buy the land, you actually own the land. There's no continued taxation of it. In America, you never truly own the land. You're just purchasing rights to the land, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but buy land here. We can't be renters all our lives. We have to purchase. We got to get mortgages instead of rents. And if it takes you, you know, um, like that's the one reason why I had put together this book on my CoachRenz.com page, and it's how it teaches you how to do a budget, and it teaches you how to invest, and it teaches you how to fix your credit. It may take you a year, it may take you 5 years to fix your credit. Fix your credit and buy your house. In that time frame, save up the money for your down payment. All you need is a 580 credit score. And if you got a 580 credit score, you're going to have at least 3.5% down on that house. Or is it 5% at 580? I think at 580, it might be 5% down. Then at 620, it's 3.5% down. It's something like that. So, but if it takes you 5 years, 10 years to do it, so you waste money every day. Put some of that money for the purpose of buying a house, buying some land. Norman says, with me on the subject of the N word, it's much more easier to understand from a Caucasian than it is from Black. Yeah, it is. Mortgage means death pledge. Come on, man. What do you mean by that, DeHaven? That sounds. Are you saying not to get a mortgage? I really want to know the answer to that one. Because if he does mean that, we will have a very civil conversation about it. We'll have a very civil conversation about that. But no. Now, not many people are going to be able to say, you have to start, like my son is, how old was that little boy? So Simone is 24. So that means he got to be 22. So Lincoln is 22 years old. I just talked to him yesterday. I swear I'm gonna punch my son in the face. I need my guy from Tacoma. Are you just telling me the meaning? Okay. But he's 22. I would not expect him to. Yeah, you want to. I would not expect him to not to save up and say, okay, Lincoln, you're gonna want to buy a house. You're gonna need to save up about $500,000. He ain't gonna do that. He's not doing that. He in the Air Force. He ain't say that's not possible. Uh, it's possible, but he would have to say, I'm gonna stay in this military for 20 to 30 years, stay on base, well, stay in base housing or on base, and then I'll be able to buy a house when I get out. Most people don't have a situation like that where they can stay somewhere for free uh, and then buy a house outright. So you're going to have to get a mortgage. Now, the goal, once you get a mortgage, is amortize that mortgage so that you can skip out on 10 to 15 years of interest, thereby saving tens of thousands of dollars and paying the house closer to just what the principal of the house is instead of paying the full thing. Because amortizing a mortgage, most people mess it up because they listen to these people say, oh, it's in one extra payment a year and you can cut your mortgage down to 15 years or something like that. But you paid all the interest if you send in one extra payment, you know? So what you do is you have to identify in your paperwork when you send a check. First, you have to get an amortization schedule. And then when you get the schedule, you're sending that extra payment or however much you can send, and you say, this accounts for principal payment January, what month we in? August of 2023 through December of 2023. You send that in. And it also says, upon completion of this, please remit to me a new amortization schedule. They not going to do it at first. And then you got to call them. Hey, I sent in a check. I requested, I got a copy of the check, a copy of the letter that said that I requested a new amortization schedule because these were principal payments August through whatever. then they might not still do it. So you got to call them again. And then you got to call them again until they send one. You got to keep being the squeaky wheel. Then finally, they're going to get tired of your ass and they're going to send you a new amortization schedule. And they might send you an amortization schedule that's the same as your current one, just shows you you're a payment ahead. And you say, and then you have to say, no, this is incorrect amortization schedule. This is supposed to account for this time frame and that time frame. And according to my spreadsheet that I use to determine what my amortization schedule should be and would be, this is what it should look like. Send that back to them. And you call them. Hey, I sent that to y'all. I need a new amortization schedule from y'all with y'all letterhead on it. And they're going to start sending you a new amortization schedule. They're going to show that you paid all those principal payments. Now, when September comes, that payment that you sent in for September, it's going to be the payment for January 2024 with the difference between the interest and the principal. And it won't be September's difference between interest and principal, which is going to be, it will be different slightly. But then you keep doing that and you do that enough times and you will pay off your house in 10, 15 years and you will not have paid all that interest. You get to skip those years of interest. And you save yourself tens of thousands of dollars because now your house is paid off and the only thing you're paying is taxes. Now, another mistake that we make, we buy a house and then we turn 50, 60 and we want a new house. We want a bigger house. I want me a big old new house. They building them new houses, over there on Wright Street. I want to go get me one of them new houses on Wright Street. Man, buy your house. Stay in that house till you die. Quit house jumping and keeping mortgages, because when you get old and you can't work no more, you will see your retirement drain away trying to pay a mortgage. And then we need to learn about this is not in that book, but we need to learn about how to do tax lien properties. You want to get houses without spending a whole bunch of money? Learn how to work a tax lien. Learn how to work a tax lien. You're going to lose on some of them. But as long as you win on 30% of them, you good. You're really good. Just win on 30%. You good. But tax lien properties are one of the fastest way you can grow like a real estate empire in America. And simple in instructions, but you got to be able to do your research. What are your thoughts on genealogy, DNA tests, the tracing your ancestor? How reliable is DNA tests? Some people think that DNA tests are only reliable for those who is blood related to you, not your ancestry. I'm kind of 50-50 on DNA testing. All right. Here's why. Let's say you were born on the West Coast, right? If you were born on the West Coast, you stand a good probability that you should have Chinese and East African in your ancestry, right? You might also have indigenous people. And if you're Black, you probably have some African ancestry. But just say your family has been there for as long as your family knows it's been there. Because they don't have DNA from 125,000 years ago Ethiopians and Cushites, for people who lived in that land, they weren't called that back then, but for people who lived back then, you don't have that blood, you don't have DNA from them. You don't have DNA from 25,000 years ago people in China. You ain't got their DNA. You can estimate, what they do is estimate what their DNA might have been like by taking a large sampling of Chinese people and seeing that it matches these large samples that they take from Ethiopian and Kemetic people and all that. So they say, well, since these Asian people have similar DNA traits to these people in Ethiopia, we're making the estimated guess that Chinese people came from Ethiopia, that Ethiopian area, East Africa. So there's still some guess to it because we don't have the ancient DNA. And then you have the fact that DNA have been mixed, especially when you look at East African bloodlines, mixed a lot. West African bloodline not mixed as much, but still mixtures. And you got mixtures all throughout. So I think it does halfway decently give you a general idea of where your family, where you genetically can come from, of what genetic traits you most match up. But it's more modernized, it's more towards modern people who are there now, right? So let's say you were a family in America who family never had a European invade your family bloodline while your family was in America, but a European invaded your family bloodline in Africa. It's still going to show you, and it may still show you that you have some European bloodline, right? So I give it about 50-50. One of my daughters did it. And I do think she did 23andMe. And 23andMe said that she had no indigenous American in her bloodline. Now, her grandfather is 2/3, I forgot what native tribe. Shit, I think it might be Chickasaw or somebody like that. But he's like 2/3. His grandparents were grandparents, both of them were his grandparents on his mother's side were full-blooded, right? There's no way my daughter doesn't have any of that in her DNA. So from personal experience, I give 50-50, but I believe there's some bullshit in there because they want to keep the least amount of people being able to claim the benefits of the native, the treaties, the native treaties. But my daughters and my son, their mama, and the people on her side of the family, they should be able to make claims. So I told her, you got to go find paperwork. You know, you got to start researching paperwork on your mom's side of the family because you can't trust on that DNA thing is swerving you to the left. Now she got all the stuff from my side of the family. She got, it came up. It came up with the Nigerian. It came up with the Mali. It came up with Scottish. It came up with all that and Italian. It came up with all that, but she didn't get none of the other ones. She got hardly nothing from her mom's side of the family. And I don't know if there's some kind of trick that they do. I don't know if I've never done 23andMe. I never done one of those things. So do they ask if you're looking through your matriarchal or patriarchal? Which one do they, or does it matter? They tested twins and came up different. Oh wow! I told her there's something up with that 23andMe because like I said, there's no way she doesn't have native. Not her. I can understand if I did. I can understand if I did because it's very little on my mother's grandmother, on my mother's side of the family. It's very little, in there. Shit, it's more white. It's more Caucasian on my on my mother's mother, my grandmother from my mom. There's more Caucasian than there is Creek Indian on hers. But if you can find the paperwork, that would be the best way to do it, man. And hopefully, once you start getting into the 1800s, that's when it becomes more difficult. It becomes more difficult when you get into the 1800s. You can probably find things throughout the 1900s, and damn 1800s, it get hard. It get hard. Actually, I have a great billion-dollar idea that would help Black people and all people be able to find out more about their family without having to do DNA testing. I'm not going to tell y'all about it because that's one of them ideas that you got to hold on to till you're ready to do it, till you have the funding to be able to do that dang on thing. But I think it's going to be very helpful. but we're talking about a venture that's probably going to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 to $4 million to do. And it's going to be hella and a lot of that's going to be spent on marketing. But I didn't know that about 23andMe. I'm going to have to pass that on to her and let her know, hey, your 23andMe, you can probably trash that. You can probably throw that in the trash. Unless you just want to keep it for the fact that it got my side right, as far as a little bit, for the most part. You don't know what your mama's on. That's interesting. I would love for her older sister to do it and see how different it is. Grand Rising Matthew. Oh, so they don't ask mother or father side? They just do it straight up, just genetic testing. So which one is the better one? Who else does it? Like, does Ancestry.com do? They do that shit, right? Now, Ancestry, they do paperwork, right? Or do they do the? Don't Ancestry do paperwork for you? They go research like land purchases, court appearances. The only thing they can't do is go to your. Like, I'm gonna tell you what was a big help to me. A big help to me was going to the church that my grandparents went to in Carrollton, Georgia, that my grandmother's family went to in Carrollton, Georgia. And they had that big ass Bible and they had a big ass book that recorded all the marriages. And this church had been around, since the 1700s. So they had all these records of marriages and all this sort of thing. So it gave me names. Then I went to the courthouses in Carrollton, and that gave me land purchases. Some of the land purchases I already knew because I'm standing on the land, because we still, the family still has some of it, a lot of it rather. At that time frame, we still had a lot of it. Still got a lot of it actually. So, I knew those names. Now I know, but I know a lot more names now, so I found other purchases. I found a few news articles here and there, and you just keep, and those things just let me keep going. Then we found slave market sales, which then let me know the boats, and then you research the charters from the boats, and some of that I had to reach out to the British records, and then those records show where they came from, and that's about as far as I was able to go. Same thing on my dad's side, and like I didn't even know my grandfather was actually from Alabama. I thought he was from Carrollton, but he was actually from Alabama. His family was, but then they came from the Ohio, and then my dad's family came from Ohio as well, which was weird, since both of them look alike. So my dad and my grandfather on my mama's side, they look alike. It's kind of weird. I used to pick on my mom like you just married your daddy, but research. Well, they didn't get married, but you got with your daddy. But his family, I found out where in Ohio, and then I found the records, and that damn Bible came in handy again. And I found the purchase, found the land, found the ship came from Scotland. So I was like, oh damn, wait, the ship came from Scotland. Fuck. So then I had to reach out and get information from Scotland, and then found records of purchase. They had great records in Scotland, right? Scotland and the whole British area has great records. They're damn near like how the Romans were as far as keeping those records. And then from Scotland, they went down to Gaeta, Italy. Gaeta, Italy had really good records. And then from Gaeta, that's where I found out it came from Mali. And specifically, they was like in that one, it was like they at that time frame, they specifically got Dogons. And I was like, shit, extremely lucky is the way I put it. And I don't believe in luck, but that one was like, damn. But it took years of research, and a lot of it was done when I was living in Germany. So getting information from those European records wasn't that hard. But now I got to do it all over again because my last military move, they stole all my stuff. I lost like damn near everything in my last military move. DNAconsultants.com. That's a good one. Because what I was going to do after my last military move, I was going to take all those records and I was going to digitize everything, which I should have done before, but we're talking about 1998, 98, 99. So we didn't have the same level of technology we have today. But I was going to digitize everything and then create like this family tree branch, like a whole family lineage thing for everybody in my family to have, even though my father's side of it wouldn't fit. It only fits those who are from his lineage. But for my mother's side to have, we can have all of that lineage. Of course, like some people, they got different. My aunts and all them, and my cousins, of course, they got other branches that they would have to figure out on their own. But I'm gonna do it again because I want it to be something that my kids can have, and so that their kids and their kids and their kids can have it and keep track of it. That's what the reason why so many European families can do that is because they kept those documentation and they kept adding to it as new children are born and that sort of thing. So I think it's very important that we all take time to do it. And you can spend a few hours a week working on it, and you'll be surprised that in 10 years or well, it didn't take me 10 years, but 3 to 4 years, how much information that you've been able to find. And you're going to hit some dead ends, but you keep going. DNA African ancestry test based on which one you order. Okay. Yeah, I've never done one. I might do one day just to see. The government already got my DNA. My DNA. I was in the Marine Corps, so government has my DNA. I ain't worried about that. There could be Tyrones of me all over the place, for all I know. Could be a Tyrone in Europe, Tyrones over on West Coast, up in North, on the Northeast. Could be some Spanish Tyrones running around. They already got my DNA, so I know some people don't do it because they don't want the government to have their DNA, but mine has already been gained, probably shelved. So I ain't worried about it. You use African ancestry and it did me well, and I'm surprised what ancestry did well as well too. I'm surprised with ancestry. So you use African ancestry and you use ancestry.com. Yeah. If I did one, I would probably use ancestry.com. If I do it again, because I will probably use ancestry to help me find all that paperwork again. You know, that'd be great. Because I started doing it when the internet came out. When I got to Germany in '93, then by '95 we had the internet. And then Sydney was born. Well, she was pregnant with Sydney, and I was like, I want her to know her family, her history. Okay. Yeah, but all that paperwork, I don't know. Yeah, but I'm gonna have to get. I want to show. I'm gonna find Angie's paperwork and show it to y'all one of these days. Because I thought it was pretty cool of how they did it. But man, that her great grandfather, whoever he just all y'all family, all y'all belong to me. We all part of this tribe, and everybody is a furrier, and Foy or whatever whichever the name was. And I'm Chief, whatever his name is. I did both because I have Guyanan background is my percentage background is my percentage accurate. Okay. So Dwayne is suggesting African ancestry and ancestry.com. They got your DNA, Teresa. I understand. If you served in the military, they got your DNA. So you don't even need to worry about it. They got your DNA if you served in the military. If you've ever been vaccinated, they got your DNA. If you've ever given blood, they got your DNA. If you ever been in, had an you ever had an operation, you ever had a baby, they got your DNA. So when I get people come to me like, man, I ain't doing that, man. I ain't giving the government my DNA. They already got your DNA, bro. If they wanted it, but they already got it. And best believe they can go get it. They can go and get it. I don't even worry about it. Even if it's not like they clone you and then you know they clone you. You'll have no conscious state of that clone. Nor that clone even have any conscious state of you. It is after 12:30, so we can talk about anything. It's after 12, so we can talk about anything. Let me unlock this door. See, that's a trick. When I tell you I need to unlock the door, it also means my knees are stiff. I need to move. Yep. Oh. Sitting in this chair for 2 hours, put some work on his knees and his back, and these ankles, and the neck, and the shoulders. You said, hell, they don't have it at birth. They don't have it at birth. Nah, they're getting your DNA at birth, and then they like to keep the stem. Um, like if I had to do all over again, I would have kept the placenta from my kids. Because they sell that, right? I'm smoking the Empress Cut Pleasure 400 right now. It's a straight Nicaraguan. But it's not as strong, so you still get the cocoa, some dates, some dried fruit, um, the rich tobacco flavor out of it, and some pepper. Uh, they take blood from you at birth. They sure do. They have been there have been some people who have done their genealogy, and it does match up with DNA tests. So it depends on the sample size of the DNA test to determine reliability. Okay. And Teresa was in the Air Force. Oh, cool. My son is in Spokane right now, and he hates it. He can't stand Spokane, so I had to give him a pep talk yesterday. I think that's probably why he called me. Well, he was calling me back, but him calling me back instead of me calling him back, even though I called him first, he needed a pep talk because he is not liking Spokane. So it depends on the sample size. What do you have to give for those? Like for ancestry, is it the swab in the mouth? Because I'm not, I'm not giving that. I'm not drawing my own blood. That's not happening. Woo, y'all should have saw me when we was training for Desert Storm, and they were talking about taking them needles and have to stick yourself if you get hit by that gas. I was like, can't do it. You had to practice with like a saline solution. I was like, I can't self mutilate. It just don't work. They say it's basic. It's a basic Native American DNA test. You talking about the one that you gave us, DNAconsultants.com? Hmm. I say, I ain't paying for a whole bunch of different tests. I'm gonna go back and find out my paperwork. But I'm gonna do the DNA test at one point. Right now, they are doing studies on how military affects your health and aging. They need to keep doing some more studies. Please tell me that you at 100%, Teresa. Please tell me you're at 100%. If you're not at 100%, send me your information on the back channels. Like, you know, Facebook, TikTok. I don't know how do you do it on YouTube. I guess that my email is on there because I believe in helping my folks get to 100%. Because trust me, the older you get, whew, that military life will whoop your ass. Go ahead and knock it out, Mayat. Go ahead and get it done, then, so you can let us know what the results are. You need to know what them results are. Well, I'm going to get ready to get off of here because I need to prepare for this meeting that I'm going to have. I know he said he's going to be up here early, and normally his early is right around 1 o'clock. Usually his early is usually at 12, so I actually expected him here 30 minutes ago. But it was raining, and he lives where the rain was going, so he might have decided to wait for the rain to be out. Now I got blue skies, so he's probably on his way. Actually, shit, let me make sure he can send me a text. Oh, that's Chad. That's good. Okay. I'm trying to take some time off this weekend. Got a family situation that I need to handle over the weekend. But I'm not sure. I don't have anybody for Saturday. That's throwing me off. Got somebody for tonight. Got somebody for Friday. I mean, Sunday, but no one for Saturday, which I need that because I need to go out of town. But anyway, that ain't y'all problem. That's mine. Both are swaps. Okay. Yeah, I can do that. But we are going to go ahead and put a pin in it for today, guys. I enjoyed the conversation. Actually, this is the first time I've had one of these conversations without it turning into a whole angry cluster. We only had one angry comment today. You know, I got to give credit. Lately, we haven't had a whole bunch of craziness going on, a whole bunch of drama with people. A few weeks ago, it seemed like every goddamn on time I get on here live, there's some, rah person that get on here. But we have just been able to just study and learn and talk and keep going without too much foolishness. So I am enjoying that thoroughly. I think everybody, hey, keep commenting on this video even after we done. If you're watching this over, because I do go through and read the comments. I need everybody to, if you've been on this thing, either like, love, hate the thing, the video. I appreciate that. You're at 80% now, working on the rest. All right, now keep working on it. Gotta, make sure they understand. If you read between my lines, make sure they understand how these things are affecting you. Like, I made a mistake the first time I went. They was like, raise your right arm, and I raised it, but it hurt like hell. And the lady didn't tell me nothing. She didn't say nothing like raise it to the point of pain. And so of course they gave me nothing for that. So I got a whole bunch of service connected stuff that got 0% because I didn't know that you only go to the point of pain. And then when you go do your PTSD stuff, you got to be completely honest. That pride made me not want to be completely honest the first time I went. But I had to let go of that pride and be completely honest about the things that I feel and the things I go through. Like, I'm gonna tell y'all, I was watching Transformers Rise of the Beast yesterday, and the scenes where where I don't know if y'all have seen the movie. This ain't really a big spoiler, but the scene where the main human guy and him dealing with having to leave his family and leave his brother and his little brother. I'm sitting up here, got a bunch of grown men in this lounge, and that shit almost had me ready to cry. I was about to cry. I had to pull back the tears. I'm laughing now. You got to laugh at your pain, right? This shit had me about to cry. And then when Bumblebee died, oh, sorry, spoiler alert. When Bumblebee died, and then he came back to life. But when he died, I was about to cry again because he was dying in combat. Cry again. And you have to be honest when you go in there and talk to those people about those things. And I wasn't honest at first. I was like, I'm a man. I ain't telling y'all all that kind of stuff. But you got to be honest. You just got to let it flow. Let it flow. But anyway, most of y'all don't care about that. You have a wonderful day as well, Debbie. I appreciate you. Oh yeah, I cannot watch the movies that got when I'm watching the movies, then they got them heartfelt father-son moments. Shit. I be about to ball out, y'all. I be sitting here being and then we did movie night last week. Last week movie night was Dead Presidents. I forgot about all the Vietnam scenes in Dead President. I was messed up. I ain't gonna lie. I was messed up. I just stopped having nightmares from that movie the other day. Actually, last night was the first non nightmarish dream that I had. But because I forgot it had all of that in there. So it threw me for a loop. Today is New Jack City. I should be all right watching New Jack City. Movie night tonight is New Jack City, so I'll be all right. Sit your ass down. Sit your $5 ass down before I make change. What did he say? So I appreciate you guys. I am going to end it for real this time, and I will see you guys. Actually, if I cannot go out of town with Angelina, then I will probably see you guys tomorrow and be on here. Well, even if I do go out of town, I'll probably see you sometime tomorrow because I do spend quite a bit of time outside on our parents' back porch having a cigar. Um, but I am not religious, and y'all are not religious, but I do believe in energy. So I am going to ask y'all to send Angelina's family some good energy as they are dealing with a um, family member who is in hospice right now. So I would like for y'all to send some good energy to her and her family. No prayers, just good energy, just good emotional energy. And I will see. I did not want him here for this damn meeting. What the fuck is he pulling up? So I will see y'all tomorrow, more than likely. And y'all have a great day. Remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself because your greatness is non negotiable. Good journey, good vibration, and continue to like and comment on all videos, all of them a lot. Y'all argue amongst yourselves. Talk to you later. Good journey, good vibrations. What up, dude?